Okay, so if you've been airbrushing for a while and you want to step up your airbrushing and get yourself a really great quality airbrush for all-round airbrushing as well as fine detail, then the Iwata HP.CS Eclipse with a 0.35mm needle is the only airbrush that you're going to need. Let's go ahead and unbox it right now. Okay, so the HP.CS Eclipse is part of the All-Star Versatility range. So there's a few different brushes in that range. Remove the sleeve. You can see it comes nicely packaged in the box. We've already opened this one up, but when you get yours, those tabs will be sealed. In the box we have the quick start guide. So this is just a basic instruction manual, but it also shows you some troubleshooting and some really basic techniques to get you started with the airbrush. Now every Iwata airbrush is tested at the factory. What that means is they actually spray each one, and that's what this is here. And you can see how fine you can go with the Eclipse. You get an Iwata sticker. We have the Iwata lube. Up to you if you want to use this. But if you do, once you clean out your airbrush, just a drop on your needle and a drop behind your trigger is all you need. You also get this tool, so that way you can remove this part of your airbrush. There are some other bits and pieces, especially within this area here where the plunger is, that you'll need a specific tool for, but generally you don't need to do much maintenance in there anyway. The airbrush itself, now it's got a nice weight to it. You see it's got the Anest Iwata written on there. Remembering this is a double action airbrush, so what that means is that when you press down for air, you won't get any paint coming out, just air, and then you pull back for paint. So the more you pull back, the more paint will come out. If you only pull back a little bit, you're only going to get a little bit of paint. So that's how you do fine lines, or you pull right back for broad spray. So the color cup is a 0.24 ounces or 7mm. And you can see it's nicely polished in there. And you got the lid. Now the lid doesn't screw on, they just sit on, and you can just get your fingernails underneath to pop it off. You may be able to see that breather hole. That needs to stay clear. If that's ever blocked, then you need to clear it. Otherwise you can have issues with the paint flow. Now we know this is a 0.35mm needle nozzle setup. So to show you the needle, loosen the needle locking nut. You don't need to fully undo it, just loosen it. Pull the needle out. And you can see there how fine that needle is. So 0.35mm, but that doesn't mean that it's just an airbrush for broad spray. You still can go super fine with this brush, and with the correct control you can almost go as fine as a micron. Now when you reinsert the needle, do so carefully all the way through till it seats, and then tighten that back up. You need to make sure you tighten up the locking nut so that when you pull back on the trigger, that mechanism moves. If you forget to tighten that, you'll see that the needle isn't now moving, therefore it won't allow any of the paint to escape. So you'll be cleaning your airbrush, put paint in, and you'll wonder why it's not working. That's usually why. Cutaway handle on these airbrushes, so I like to have it like that, so that when I'm holding my brush, these bars are sitting on that part of my skin. If it's like that, sometimes that can get caught. So that's why I like to have the bars blocking that, so that that way there's no risk of that going into full throttle mode with paint. The air cap, now with the Iwata brushes you can remove the air cap. You don't need to buy an extra cap to remove the air cap and be able to spray with the airbrush. So these, they just can be taken off. I just use them for protecting the needle, but when I'm painting I always have that off. So that's pretty much the Eclipse. Let's go ahead and hook it up and show you how it performs. Okay, so there's many different ways that you can thin your paint for airbrushing. Generally, if you think about a milky consistency, that's a good way to start. Most airbrush paints say that they're ready to use, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best way to use them. I tend to work with at least a 1:1 ratio. That means equal parts paint and reducer or thinner, depending on what your brand of paint requires. They usually have their own reducer or thinner. So for the purpose of the demonstration, we've just got some red paint here. So the paint I'm using is a Trident airbrush paint. Now this can be used on paper, automotive applications, because they're automotive grade pigments, so they're not going to fade once you clear coat them. You can also use them on t-shirts with a t-shirt booster and seal them up. So these paints have this red plug that protects the paint from drying out if you are going to store them for longer periods of time. So I'm just removing that at the moment and put the lid back on. And we've got our 14702BT bottle. So this is basically the 2-ounce bottle, 56ml. These are solvent proof. They've also got the twist top lid, which is handy for when you're pouring into your airbrush. And you can also get these in a 28ml as well as 112ml size. And these also have these red plugs, which is good because, again, using these to store your paints is a good idea. So the 1:1 ratio that I mentioned, I'm just going to do that by eye. You don't have to be too fussed. So we'll just get some paint in the bottle. That'll do. Again, the airbrush atomizes really fine, so we don't need a great deal of paint. This is going to do a lot. And now I'm just going to fill the rest up so that we've got equal parts of reducer now, or equal enough. So I reckon about there will do. And you can see that line versus the reducer line. And now I'll sit this back on the top. You could use that plug, seal it up and shake it, but I'm not going to bother because I'm going to use this straight away. Give it a good shake. And now that's mixed and ready to go. Okay, so I'm going to just show you the performance of this gun using the general airbrushing rule, which is basically what I like to use as a 1:1 ratio. I'll set my PSI at around 35 PSI, or just between the 2 to 3 bar. Now, if you want to go finer, then over thin your paint and reduce your PSI. So for example, if I was going to do really fine detail, even with a brush like this, I'd probably run my paint at sort of 70% reducer, 30% paint, and about 18 to 20 PSI. It also depends on what brand of paint you're using. So this is all true to the Trident range. You may need to adjust those ratios a little bit if you're using other brands. So let's go ahead and put some paint in the color cup. So again, this is just a twist top lid, which is nice and easy, and you can just pour that in. That's plenty of paint, we don't need more than that. Seal it up. Again, always make sure that breather hole is clear. And the other thing I like to do is remove the air cap. All right, so just exposing that needle. This allows for finer detail. You can see where you're going, as well as managing your tip drying, which is something that happens when you're painting for a while. You get air and paint drying up on the end of the needle, and that could obstruct your paint flow. So this way it's easier to maintain that. So again, pressing down for air, you can see nothing's coming out because it's a double action airbrush, and then pulling back for paint. So the more I pull back, you can see I can really get a broad spray. Or if I move in close, pull back a little bit, and I'm able to get finer detail. And you can even go finer than that if you want to do some fine dots. And you can hear that compressor that we're using is the Sparmax TC620X. And that has a 2.5 litre tank, 1/6 horsepower, so super powerful. And we're not going to get any intermittent spray either, because this compressor is a twin piston motor, so it's not a diaphragm pump. And the diaphragm pump compressors, or a smaller type compressor, sometimes they can pulsate the air, and then you get an uneven spray pattern. And you can hear that compressor only kicks in when needed. So it's not running continuously, which is also great for the longevity of the compressor. And it's going to reduce any moisture buildup as you're painting for hours and hours and hours. So you can see from that quick demonstration, this airbrush can do fine detail, broad spray very, very easily. It's an extremely versatile brush, and it can handle pretty much any of your airbrushing projects. I've got a few of these myself, and I use them in conjunction with my higher end microns, and that way it covers all aspects of airbrushing, whether I'm doing those fine, really fine detail jobs or a broad spray. Well, the Eclipse is always that trusty airbrush that you can grab, and it's just a workhorse, but it can also perform really well for all sorts of different tasks.